Thanks so much for staying with us here on TVC Breakfast. It's now time for us to link up with Eshomomo Imodu in our Abuja studios alongside Tijisu Adeoye. Good morning, guys. Over to you.
It's beautiful to be back here this beautiful Monday morning. And of course, we're here to discuss what is happening in Abuja, in Nigeria, and across the world.
Yeah, good morning, Nigerians, and to our women folk, happy International Women's Day. TJ?
Thank you very much.
It's your week, it's your month.
So I can do as I like.
No, please. Let's give them what we have.
Well, let's go into what we have for you today. Now, rising tensions in the Middle East are once again sending shockwaves through global energy markets. As the war involving Iran escalates, analysts warn that disruptions to key oil transit routes could significantly drive up global energy prices, with the strategic Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply passes under threat. Markets are already reacting with sharp increases in crude oil prices and renewed concerns about energy security. For economies heavily dependent on imported fuel, the implication could be far-reaching, from higher transportation costs to inflationary pressure on goods and services.
Experts say prolonged instability in the region could push oil prices above the $100 per barrel mark, potentially slowing global economic recovery and affecting developing economies the most. Governments and energy markets around the world are therefore closely monitoring developments in the conflict and their ripple effects on supply chains and international trade. And this morning on FCT Brief, we examine the broader geopolitical and economic consequences of the Iran, US and Israel war and what it would mean for global energy prices and emerging economies like Nigeria. Joining us to unravel the implications is Dr. David Ogbole, a public affairs analyst who will help us understand the evolving dynamics of the conflict and the potential impact on global energy markets. It's nice to have you here this morning.
Thank you very much, TJ and Eshomomo. Always a delight to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, there is this distortion in the global energy market. The crude price is going up and price of petrol is also going up. And a lot of people are saying that it's because of the war between the US, Israel, and Iran. And help us understand how strategic this Strait of Hormuz, because we learned that Iran has blocked the movement of supply to other countries that passes through that route. How strategic is this particular axis to the stability of the energy sector?
Thank you very much. On the front burner now is the issue of the tremor or the shock in the oil market because of the current tension or crisis occasioned by US and Israel strategically in alliance, hitting Iran. The build up to the first strike on the 28th of February 2026 was such that it was a war of words, and a lot of the nations who saw the impending implications began to put in some measures in place. The Strait of Hormuz, like you say, is just a 2-kilometer waterway that controls, like you said earlier, 5% of the world's global supply of oil. And that strait borders Iran directly. Apart from the United States of America and Russia, who are the largest oil-producing nations in the world, the rest of the oil titans are within the Gulf states. Iran is one of them. Saudi Arabia is there. And then the UAE states too. And the tension in Iran has occasioned some missile attacks on the neighboring Gulf states too. So they are all in shock, as we say. 44 of India's tanks, oil tanks, are stationed right now waiting for access to clear through the Strait of Hormuz. So that is just one example of many other countries that are suffering shockwaves because of this particular crisis, between Iran, Israel, and the US. So basically, those are the oil states. And any slight disturbance or tremor or shock has a global effect because there's a disequilibrium right now as far as oil production and oil circulation is concerned. And you know the general dynamics of demand and supply is such that if demand is met with supply, there will be equilibrium, even in terms of pricing. But anywhere demand is rising, but supply is not matching up with it, what happens is that prices will naturally go up because there is a huge competition on the little available ones that are moving around, you know, the world. So as we speak now, the oil prices a month ago, that was $63 per barrel, has gone to $98 now. And analysts are warning that it will cross $100 soon if the situation persists. So that is an analysis of the current issue. And I'm so glad that you left the moral implication of the war out. Let's judge on the, the economic global implication of this as far as the oil producing and also oil consuming nations are concerned. Not all states produce, but a lot of the states that produce also consume, especially Nigeria too. I think as we discuss further, we're going to be examining those implications too. Of
course, Mr. Obule, I like the part that you took these conversations to because countries like Nigeria depend heavily on oil revenue. So at first glance, the surge may look like crude oil appears beneficial. The surge in crude oil appears beneficial. But history also shows that geographical crises bring extreme volatility to the market. So the real question now is, does a crisis like this ultimately strengthen Nigeria's hold on the market in terms of crude oil, or does it expose it to this volatility?
You see, there's something we call the petroleum paradox, or what they call the resource curse. Because we've wondered why Nigeria, that was 6th largest oil producing, currently we are standing at 16th largest oil producing nation on earth, not because of our reserve, but the production quota as far as OPEC standard is concerned. You may have huge reserve, but how much of the reserve are you tapping out? That is what gives you a rating as far as oil producing nations are concerned. So currently we are still unable to meet our OPEC benchmark. We are producing at 1.2 million to 1.4 million barrels per day. And we have potentials to reach 3 million barrels per day if a lot of factors that we're going to be discussing, as we progress, are put in place. So it wonders, there's a wonder why an oil-producing nation like Nigeria should even feel the shock waves at all. The reasons are, number one, we have our dysfunctional and underperforming refineries within Nigeria. So we are not able to produce enough to meet local demands. So we still have to import fuel as far as refined products is concerned. We still have to import. So you can imagine if there was no Dangote refinery now that is helping to cushion, the 1,050 naira pump price now would not have been feasible. Would have been buying fuel to something 2,000 or more. But because there is the Dangote refinery on ground that is helping to cushion the shock waves, that is why we're even buying fuel, PMS, at 1,050. We are still a rentier nation that imports petroleum products. That's a paradox. And all because we don't have functional refineries on ground here, apart from the newly introduced Dangote refineries. Then, another aspect that people don't see is the exchange rate pressure. When U.S. borrows, their debt is in U.S. dollars. They pay in the original currency. But when we borrow, oil prices are pegged in dollars, not in our own local currency, naira. So as we are importing based on U.S. dollars. And anytime there is an imbalance where dollar gains ground more than naira, we will need more naira to import, to buy at the local market to import, and then the import cost, and then the servicing of middlemen is also there. So it increases our, landing costs. And then this matter of logistic inefficiencies, there is still the matter of subsidy frauds, where there is round tripping. Even though subsidy has been removed, there is still an importation of fuel within our country. So with this logistic issue of poor road networks, fuel has to be transported along a vast region of Nigeria. Nigeria is 923,800 square kilometers in dimension. It makes us many times larger than these, major nations in the world today. So, and we have poor road networks. There is a pipeline vandalization and a lot of logistic issues that impact on fuel distribution. Those are things that culminate in final hike in terms of prices of this. So, and then we have exceeded 200 million now in terms of our population. That's increase in demand rather. Those are matters that all help to compound the issue of fuel hike in terms of price, even though we're a producing nation. But primarily, like I said, we've not been able to maximize our local production because of the absence of more refineries.
Okay.
So if government looks at short-term and also long-term structural reforms, I think we should be able to address all of this, and then it will mitigate any global shock, in terms of oil matters that Nigeria will face going forward.
Okay, I'd like us to look at this global shock. It's one thing that we can't rule out. Every now and then we might have some global shocks and all that. What can a nation do when you envisage there might be such a global shock to kind of insulate your economy? Is it possible to insulate your economy against such variables that may come up? Because we know that when we have this kind of war now, that we seem to earn more. And the issue is, what do we do? What are we doing with the earnings? And what are we doing with the policy? Because you said we've not been able to meet the OPEC quota. Our production is not at the optimal. Now, what can we do policy-wise that when such a crisis comes in to insulate our economy from the adverse effects?
Like I said earlier, there are short-term cushioning measures, and then there are long-term strategic reforms that we need to put in place. When you talk about the short-term cushioning measures, a lot of the oil-producing nations in the world today have what we call the shock reserves. They have reserves in place that will help to mitigate or alleviate any global shock as far as local consumption is concerned. There are nations that have up to 90 days shock, reserves, and there are nations that even have up to 180 days shock reserve. That's 6 months. Meaning that no matter what happens in the global oil market, they have enough reserve on ground to be able to cushion their citizens, especially in two key areas of transportation and the food systems. That is where the populace feels the impact of oil more. Transportation, people have to move around, to go about their daily activities of earning and also contributing to national development. And then food systems. Poverty is only poverty if it affects food on the table. The rural person does not care about how much cars, the prices of cars. No. What he cares about is that if there is food on the table, good. Poverty is eradicated if there is food on the table. So food systems. So what Nigeria ought to do, basically, we should have a reserve right now, a dump that should be able to cushion Nigerian citizens for the next 90 days, if not 180 days. But as it is now, champions are forced to begin to practice in the ring now instead of practicing before the ring. A lot of the nations, began to sense this outcome and they began to prepare. Like I said, okay, I didn't say this earlier. India, by last month, stopped the export of diesel. They are stockpiling their diesel for local consumption because India, 1.2 billion people, movement and food systems will be affected, and diesel contributes a lot to their movement and their industrial processes. So they stopped the export of diesels. So that is something that Nigeria should have begun to think of. And then, before this crisis and the shock waves, subsidy was removed. And then the benefit of subsidy should have been used in the structural reforms. Number one, strengthening local capacity of refining by providing crude to the existing refineries at stable, and affordable prices. And number two, revamping Port Harcourt, revamping Warri, and revamping Kaduna refineries. That is what subsidy removal should have helped to accomplish. So you see now, we are earning more. Currently, $98 per barrel, all the way from $63 per barrel. Look at the difference. We are earning more. It's a windfall for us. But because these local measures have not been put in place, that's why we're still experiencing the shockwaves that we shouldn't experience. So,
correct, Mr. Ogule.
Good. So going forward now, these structural reforms must be put in place besides the emergency cushioning measures.
All right, we still have more to discuss on this, but let's take a quick commercial break now. Don't go anywhere. We still have more for you on the program. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Thank you for staying with FCT Brief. Now, we're still discussing the Iran war and its implication on global energy prices. Now, Mr. Abule, historically, geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East have reinforced the strategic power of oil-producing nations. But we're now in a different era where economies are actively trying to transit from fossil fuels to alternative sources of energy. Now, does a crisis like this reassert the geopolitical leverage of these oil-producing countries, or does it automatically, make that transition from fossil fuel smoother for other countries and also all those oil-producing countries?
It sends a warning, basically, that the falling of the yellow leaf is a warning to the green one. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier, champions don't practice in the ring. They practice before the ring. A lot of this is catching nations by surprise. For Nigeria, we are more a gas nation than an oil nation. We hold one of Africa's largest gas reserves. And this gas reserve has capacity to power both Africa and Europe for the next 100 years. But a lot of this is underutilized. So that leaves us with the responsibility on the immediate to begin to develop our gas potentials so that we can have this diversification from, depending on PMS and this oil product. So gas is still there. And then our potentials for solar energy is very, very high, particularly in the semi-arid north. We must begin to look in that direction now, where if we explore our potentials for solar energy, build national grids that are dependent on solar, the contribution from solar, the contribution from gas will reduce our dependence on PMS, AGO, and all of these other matters for, as sources of energy. Very, very, very important. See, this, in fact, the CNG matter, we kissed it briefly, we romanced it briefly, but we are yet to marry it fully as far as the nation is concerned. So if we are considering this matter of diversification, then we must look in those directions such that the main area where it hits, which is transportation and food systems, by the time we begin to produce EVs, by the time we begin to produce expand our usage of CNG, we see that all of these matters, there will be less shock on us. So basically, transition from fossil fuel, it's difficult to have full transition from fossil fuel. Because the moment you are talking about this transition, we are talking about global politics now and a matter of global interest. There are deeper dimensions to it. China still uses coal. While the world is talking about renewable and green energy, China still uses coal. Coal that has a direct effect on the atmosphere. So these matters are matters of global politics. But the fact remains that we must have to diversify, not really transit entirely. That full transition will be difficult to have in the next 50 years. Okay. Because if we transit, the emphasis leaves fossil fuel. How about nations whose revenue is entirely dependent on fossil fuel? What becomes of their economy? So transition is difficult, but diversification is what we should be looking at now. Okay,
Mr. David, I've also wondered that there are nations that their entire energy demand depend on hydro. And I wonder the state of our hydro power generation in Nigeria. But the question is, if we never had a local refinery like Dangote refinery, what would have happened with this kind of a global shock? Because we can't wish it away. We can only reduce the effect of such shocks on the economy. So what should begin to be our thoughts about the Port Harcourt, the Warri refineries, so that we don't entirely depend on the scenario where it is just one refinery we have. I don't know, we're importing all the fuel we needed from foreign countries with this kind of a shock. What would have happened to those who were saying that, okay, we should import and all that?
So if at the supplementary dimension of Dangote refineries, we are still having PMS pump price at 1,050. just think about the effect naturally, like a natural layman now. What would have happened if there was no Dangote refineries on ground? Nigeria would have been in the chaos by now. Because the refineries that we had, Port Harcourt, Warri, and Kaduna, they are non-functional. And even in their non-functional state in times past, you hear news that they are being shut down for repairs, for routine maintenance, and so on. Nigeria's taxpayers' money has been entering into a hole that would never have been filled entirely. The shock and the effect of it would have been more catastrophic than it is right now. So, back to your main question. We removed subsidy and we had a lot of returns from subsidy. But instead of it used in the structural reforms, subsidy was being shared to the federating units or the states. And the president came up recently and said, there is enough going to all of the states now. But the people are still complaining because the flow is not reaching the grassroots. He said, please water the grass, meaning the governors who hold this subsidy, huge subsidy deposit. There is no excuse again as far as payments of salary is concerned and gratuities of people. That has been sorted out because of the removal of a subsidy. I must commend the president for demonstrating the courage to do that. It's been a long time coming. But the effect of it, which is more money, should have been, a portion of it should have been transferred into the strengthening of our local potentials, for more. But now, there is a lesson now. Going forward, the windfalls from these sales of oil, from this particular crisis now to Nigeria, we must use it to strengthen our local refineries. If that is not done, then we have every evidence now to conclude that the Nigerian economy is not run by Nigeria, because a lot of the economic policies in Nigeria now was not designed by Nigeria. SDG and MDG, they are not designed by Nigeria. Those are neo-colonialist chokeholds on our economy. If we are not able to make our production processes work, then it's a sign that we walked our way with our two hands and submitted to the slavery of foreign powers. But that has to be disproved by this current government now as we continue to work on our local systems to produce for us and then mitigate any global shock as far as oil matters are concerned.
Effects of this global shock often lead to inflation. And we see that affecting already transportation, we see that affecting food prices and all of that. How would you say Nigeria itself can, would I say, block itself from this ripple effects on other sectors of the economy, such as transport and, food and other areas that it might affect?
On a practical microeconomic analysis, a bag of beans that was 52 became 58 last week. Rice also moved up. So you see that it is beginning to have effect on a practical sense, not just grammatical sense now or theoretical sense. It's beginning to have practical effect. Why? It is affecting the food systems. Transportation of food, distribution of food are all part of the food systems. And it's largely dependent on energy. The fuel that people use. So all of these fuels and taxes and so on is the consumer that bears the brunt, at the ends. But for Nigeria, like we said earlier, building a strategic energy reserve is an imperative, is something that is a must right now. It's something we must do right now so that we can be able to cushion these issues. And then the government must roll out some, let me say, I still call it subsidies in transport and then the food system, where we grant some tax rebates, for fuel, and then we roll out CNG buses to see that the food system is not affected. For once in a very long time, we thought that this matter of food prices has attained the dimension of stabilization, where it was not imaginable before now that a bag of rice, 50 kg, will sell for 48,000, 50,000. It was unimaginable. But because of reforms, President Tinubu has been able to contain that and bring that to that unimaginably low level. But as we should pray that this does not persist. But while we pray, we must walk, because faith without works is dead. And what is the work we must do now? We must build a strategic energy reserve now, use the windfalls to be able to put in measures to ensure that these two critical areas of transportation and food is not adversely affected. That is what we must do now.
Okay, still talking about what we must do. You just talked about strategic reserves and all that, and the other time you're talking about the need to diversify the economy and ensure that
diversify energy.
Energy, yeah. What can the National Assembly do? Because it's not just what Nigerians are saying should happen or what the executive wants to happen. What role can the lawmakers play when we talk about amending so maybe a statute book, so that it will be government will be able to use some of these largesse that come in from such windfall for strategic development. If it is not allowed in the present constitution, what role can they play to ensure that we begin to move our country forward?
The only role I see the National Assembly playing is just to raise conversations, debate issues, move motions, support motions. They really don't have the magic wand to be able to do. This lies basically in the hands of the executive. Because when you talk about National Assembly, laws have processes and procedures. And those processes and procedures are not as immediate as you think. For instance, if a bill comes to the floor of the House, it runs through the first and second reading, goes to the public hearing, comes back again, and then from the public hearings, memorandums are accepted from various, interest groups that is merged now, and then it goes into the final draft that they present to the president for accent. Can emergency situations wait for all of those procedures? No, it cannot. So we have to depend on executive orders and executive pronouncements.
But can executive orders go into sharing, stopping the money from being shared with federating units when it is statutory that this money comes to the federation account? It must be shared. Can executive order override that?
You see, there are no constitutional pegging of percentages of subsidies that should be shared to federating units. Those are executive decisions run at the Governors Forum, assented to by the President. So those are not matters that you subject to legislative procedures. I don't know if you understand. So there is no constitutional percentage of this should be set from subsidy to federating units. That's why I say it is not in the hands of the legislative units now. It's in the hands of the executive. What the legislators can do now is raise conversations that give legitimacy and teeth or bite to executive actions. That is what they can do now.
I spoke about transition to renewable energy earlier, and you said that diversification is a more realistic approach to it. But why the transition or why the diversification seems a little bit draggy now is that it's kind of expensive, to transition into solar and what have you, and EVs and what have you. Would you advise government to provide sort of like a subsidy to make this transition or diversification much more easier?
It's not a subsidy. They are direct investments.
Okay.
Direct investments in the sense that we are getting a lot. I keep repeating this. We have a windfall right now. Yeah. Just this 1-2 weeks now, we have a windfall from, $63 per barrel. We are at 96 now, pursuing $100 per barrel. And we are at the center of this economic play globally. So what we do with this windfall, or what we even do with the subsidy now, is what we're talking about. This can be channeled as far as direct, developmental investments are concerned, not even subsidies. We have the money on ground already. We should just look in the direction of diversification. And we also have the natural reserve. Like I say, we're more a gas nation than an oil nation because of the gas reserves we hold, the largest in Africa. If we look in that direction and begin to build gas infrastructure, expand gas pipelines, and put all of those measures in place, we will depend less on this. And then the national grid for solar will have the resources to be able to do it. If we station it in the north, especially areas that have less insecurity issues now, we station it there, we cannot begin to gain power. Nigeria currently, we are still unable to stabilize at 10,000 megawatts for a nation of 260 million people. South Africa is 60 million people. They have 48,000 megawatts of electricity. Right. We have not stabilized at 10. Why? We are looking at one source only. But if we diversify, we can pull from here, and meet our energy needs, both for domestic and also for industrial consumption.
Quite an insightful conversation we've had this morning. Thank you so much, Mr. Ogbole, for your time on the program. It's always a delight speaking with you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you, TVC.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being a part of our conversation this morning. We'll now hand you over to Lagos, where Ibrahim and the rest of the team are standing by to continue with the rest of the show.
Watch to Jesu and Eshomamo Imodu for that insightful analysis and conversation.